Today we're looking at the Pivot Trail 429 Enduro. This is a brand new bike for 2021, a redesign of the previous Trail 429 frame, and then this is the Enduro Pro XT XTR build, which means we've got a bunch of sweet XT XTR type stuff, and because it's an Enduro, we have a Fox 36 factory fork. I'm going to go over the details of this bike. I'm going to talk a little bit about who it's for. I'm also going to put some links in the description below for some really good first impression ride reviews that already exist online, even though this bike has only been out for about a week. So stay tuned and let's have a look at the Pivot Trail 429 Enduro Pro XT XTR build. So the Pivot Trail 429 Enduro is a 140mm travel fork and a 120mm rear travel, and all versions of this bike come with a full carbon frame, front and rear triangle, with the only exceptions to that carbon being the alloy rocker link and alloy lower link. The Trail 429 Enduro comes in 4 different build kits. This is the base level, if you can believe that. It's a $69.99 US price version, or $92.99 in Canada, and there are versions going up to $10,699 US, and that would be the Team XX1 AXS, so wireless electronic shifting version. So they call this, or I consider this to be the base version just because it's the cheapest, but this is basically because Pivot is a high-end manufacturer, and this is their base, is where a lot of other companies would basically call their ultimate top-of-the-line bike. So being a Pivot, it's not a case, I would say, of them being expensive bikes. It's a case of them being extremely well-equipped and well-engineered bikes. And that's where that extra price goes to. So we're going to be looking at the specs and talking about geometry. I think I mentioned I'm going to put a link about actual ride reviews on this. So being the Pro XT XTR version, I think all of these are actually coming with these Maxxis dissector tires, and that's a front and rear option. That is because this is a really fast rolling aggressive sort of a tire, so it's sort of like the more speed oriented version of something like a Minion series tire. So this is going to carry speed a little bit better. You still have really good cornering knobs, and I think that fits hand in hand with what this bike is designed for. We of course have a Shimano XTR rear derailleur, XT 10 to 51 tooth gear range, race face Affect cranks on here, race face narrow wide chainring, that DW linkage that Pivot is so well known for. So you'll see DW links most notably these days on either on Pivots or on Ibis bikes. That DW link doesn't mean that those two bike companies are going to have bikes that ride the same. It means that they're using a combination of 2 short links that rotate in a certain direction compared to each other. And each Pivot and Ibis will sort of ask Dave Weigel, the designer, to engineer the bike to perform the way they want it to. It's not like they just take an off-the-shelf sort of a thing and just apply it. It is a tuned for the bike kind of thing. The rear shock on here, speaking of tuning shocks, is the DPX2 factory version. So that is one of the differences between a standard Trail 429 and the Enduro version, is that we're getting this piggyback version of the shock on here. That's going to make the bike a little bit more capable when it comes to those really long, aggressive, chundery descents that your shock is going to perform basically the same at the top of that descent versus the bottom, where a non-piggyback shock, you may end up getting a little bit of compression and rebound dampening differences as you ride a long, chundery descent. On the front of this bike, we have a Fox factory fork, and that's a factory 36 with 140 millimeters of travel. This is with the Grip 2 damper. So that just means that we have high speed, low speed compression done with these two dials here. So there are two different versions of a factory fork. We of course have that same dissector on the front, 29 by 2.4. And these are an XO casing tire. So you get some puncture protection, but they're still trying to lean this bike towards being light. One of the things when you're looking at a high-end bike is that you start to see where some of the details are between a high-end bike and another bike that sort of on paper has the same spec. One of those things that you see on here is an actual Dt350 Rear Hub on this DT Swiss set of wheels. These are the XM 1700s. One of the things with DT is that XM 1700 means that this wheel weight for the pair comes in at roughly 1700 grams. We're of course set up tubeless on these tires. And as mentioned, we do have that Dt350 rear hub. So this is a proper star ratchet rear hub. This is a legit aftermarket quality kind of a hub on here. One of those other places that you see the details is we've got the 4-piston XT brakes on here, but we also have the high-end 180 millimeter Shimano rotors on here. So with the Ice Tech and that spidered style rotor, you'll see a lot of other companies that it looks like you're getting a cheaper bike with an XT brake, but stuff like this, these are expensive rotors and they do make a difference to the bike's performance. Of course, we have a through axle here. In this case, it's a through axle that's attaching to a Super Boost rear hub. So that's wider spacing than standard boost. And it is done so for a couple of reasons. Your wheels will actually be stronger in this case because flanges can be moved a little bit further apart, which helps to triangulate the spokes a little bit better for lateral strength on the wheels. It also gives a bit of freedom for the way that the cranks are set up to actually have your chain line lining up with your cassette. Means that your sprocket is a little bit further out from center, and that means that you can get a nice short chainstay. And that's something that Pivot is known for. In a world right now where we're seeing a little bit of a divergence on high-end bikes, companies that try to offer short chainstays and companies that are going quite long. There is no good or bad with that. It really does come down to a rider's preference and what kind of a bike they're looking for. In this case, this is going to make your bike a really, really poppy, playful sort of a bike. So if you're looking for something that just stabilizes and neutralizes the terrain, maybe this isn't for you. If you're looking for the bike that as an experienced, skilled rider, you're looking to manual, you're looking to jump, you want something that even handles maybe tighter sections of trail a little bit better, that's where a short chainstay is really going to shine for you. We have a Fox factory seat post on here, so we see that nice beautiful Kashima color on there. This is a size large we're looking at, in which case I believe that means this has a 150 millimeter drop. It goes to 175 on an XL, and I would have to check again on my specs to see what happens on the smaller sizes. We have a Pivot branded WTB Volt saddle on here. So a very common, popular option because it's a very common, popular saddle. We have Pivot's carbon handlebars on here, so they do make their own handlebars. The new XT lever shifter combo. These really nice. If you've watched a number of my videos, you'll see that I bitch and moan about some of the stock grips on some bikes. I think these Pivot grips are actually a really nice grip. They're quite cushy without being a massive sort of diameter. So a nice detail. We have a Pivot stem on here, and this is where you can kind of see some of that Trail 429 roots on this bike, where unlike a lot of bikes that are designed for really aggressive riding, you're still seeing like a 60 mil long stem on this bike, and that is sort of paying homage to the fact that as much as this is the Enduro version, This is still a bike designed to get out there and ride long rides. It's just assuming that if you're buying the Enduro version, you like to really go after it when it comes to the descents. So those are the quick details about spec. Now I'll just show you some of the other things that happen on this bike. A, for details, if we're going to be doing that, the way Pivot does their cable routing is very, very clean and sophisticated with these Allen key tightenable bits on each end of the cable going into and where it comes out of the frame. The concept here is that you can basically pull the cable tight within the frame and then tighten up those bits to reduce any sort of rattle. We do have a flip chip on this bike with a low and lower setting. Part of the reason that they're doing this is this is built up as a 29er, but this bike is still considered 27.5 plus compatible. So you would be able to ride that in the lower setting, which would raise the bottom bracket a bit, which makes this bike a bit more appropriate for doing a 27.5 plus. It also means that you could get creative and probably do a mullet style with 27.5 plus and a 29er on the front, which could make for a really cool sort of a setup. So as I mentioned, short chain stays, they vary because of that flip chip between about 430 and 432 millimeters. So if you're curious, I would say take a look at some of the bikes that are at the other end of the spectrum. Some of the specialized things like the Forbidden Druid, to see what happens on a size large for chainstay length. Once again, if you watch a lot of these videos, you will soon learn that I am a fan of short chainstays. I like a playful bike, not just a straight out high speed bike. So Pivot tends to fit really well with the kind of things that I like on a bike. So, other details. We have a very, very nice chainstay protection on here, which is going to help both protect the chainstay, but also neutralize any kind of noise if you're going through, once again, that chundry stuff. And that's covering the chainstay. We also have protection that runs underneath the seat stays for quite a distance there. So, as we know, when we're rocketing down a really rocky fast trail, even with the clutch on one of these XTR derailleurs, or if it's a SRAM with a clutch, there's still potential for the chain to get whacked around, and that's going to make sure that you're not damaging your frame with that. Those wheels that I mentioned, they're a 30 millimeter internal, so that is going to work quite perfectly with a 2.4 width tire. Just show you some of these details of the linkage from the other side here. And from here we can make out that we have some nice protection on the down tube. We also have room for bottle cage on the down tube. We have extra set of bolts, so that can be for some sort of Enduro storage of strapping a tube or anything on there. And then you also have another set down here, which is where you could potentially put, there is like a special tool that these guys are making now to go with these bikes. That does seem to me like quite a prone spot for damage to whatever, so I'd personally be using those bolts and those bolts if I was storing anything on here. So, I've sort of mentioned it, but who is this bike for? I would say it is for somebody who, you're either a guy who's used to a big travel bike and you're looking for something lighter and more lively, or somebody coming from the cross-country bike world and wanting some familiarity with a shorter travel bike and the way they respond, yet you know that you're getting to the point where you're really wanting to attack on some trails. There is some crossover. I mean, on these guys here, one of the things is on a long ride, you just have that little bit lighter of a bike and something that when it comes to technical maneuvers, you're not going to have to preload quite as hard. So on a long ride that includes a lot of technical stuff, this may just be a little bit less tiring than something like the Switchblade that's a bit longer. In exchange, if you were riding with a focus on a lot of really hard descents that had really big rock, maybe big drops or something, maybe that's where the Switchblade stands out for you. They are two pretty distinctive bikes that have a lot of crossover, but there are going to be things, and it's going to be about a rider's personality, and their riding personality is going to decide which way they go between a Trail 429 Enduro or a Switchblade. Other things to mention on here as far as geometry. So this one being I have to dig out my cheat sheet here. In the Enduro version, we're looking at a 65.5 degree head tube angle in the slacker mode and a 74.5 degree seat tube angle. I wouldn't be thrown off for people who are hunting for a super steep seat tube angle. There is some fudge in the way different companies will measure their seat tube angles. I spent quite a bit of time on the Firebird last year, and on paper it looks like it has a slacker seat tube angle than it actually does. So you do have your actual seat tube. If you can see, it's aiming at a couple inches ahead of where your true bottom bracket is. And so any of these modern bikes will come up with some way to sort of give you a theoretical seat tube angle. And I think in the way that Pivot does it, it's maybe a more honest version. It does seem steeper than what their numbers say. So just keep that in mind. Don't get too wrapped up if you're convinced by something like an Ibis or something like that with like a 76 or 77 degree seat tube that this is going to be too slack for you, because there is some fudge in those theoretical seat tube angle numbers. So keep that in mind. This guy here in a size large in the Enduro version is going to be about a 465 millimeter reach. I'm having to use a little bit of a fudge factor for it being an Enduro, because I don't believe that they actually offer true full geometry charts for these guys. But once again, that seems a little bit on the short side, but then take into account that you do have a stem that's a little bit longer on this. And having thrown myself over top of this bike that I would usually ride a large, I thought from the geometry charts that I'd be considering an XL. I think I would still be looking at shortening that stem. I'm 6'1" on a size large, and I would be quite happy on a size large just from in-store sitting and sort of taking quick little test rides in the store. Another thing to keep in mind, there's two colors on this bike. There is a silver and this blue color, and I hope this blue is showing up somewhat accurately. Compared to what I see on the Pivot website, this blue is quite a bit grayer and less robin egg-ish blue, if that description makes any sense to you. It is, yeah, not quite as baby bluish. It's kind of a muted gray blue, which from the people who have ogled this bike already seems to be getting thumbs up for it being a really nice color and being a little bit unique compared to the palette that we're seeing on a lot of bikes recently. I forgot to weigh this bike, so I'm going to weigh it and I'm going to put it in the description below. That is usually part of this whole thing, so have a peek down there. You can see the weight, and you can also see those links to some really cool reviews that include some good point of view stuff that will get you absolutely stoked on this bike and on riding in general. I'm Graham, this is Bike Bros. We're a bike shop in Cochrane, Alberta, Canada. We are Pivot dealers, of course, and fans of Pivot in a big way. We're Giant dealers, Rocky Mountain and Marin. We love talking bikes. We love helping people to get on their new perfect bike. So if you're in the area, drop by, say hello. Otherwise, we do a bunch of these videos just trying to give you some of the close-ups, some of the details, and a bit of extra thought about these bikes, especially when they're new models. Thanks so much for watching. We'll talk to you later.